Okay, geographical discoveries, Reformation, the rise of absolutist states in continental Europe and the exception of England that showed the model to other people how to organize a better government, and then other people later tried to imitate England. Okay, let's go briefly to the Reformation, what you mentioned in the beginning. Because Reformation, for example, is directly related to what we are going to do today. Okay. What happened in the wake of the Reformation, at least in Northern Europe? Remember, we emphasized what happened with people in the wake of the Reformation. It's you or anybody else, you know.
Higher literacy.
Huh?
Better literacy.
Literacy, yeah. Literacy. Literacy is a bookish word to say what?
Reading.
Reading. we use a bunch of bookish words. Literacy means to know how to read and to write. So in Northern Europe, because of the Bible reading, Martin Luther said, read the Bible, guys, girls, the children, adults, you will be whatever, learn about Christ. Because of this, indirectly, people became literate. Okay? That's very important for us, for today's talk. Because of literacy, widespread literacy, especially in towns and then in countryside, partially in countryside. So we have a pool of very educated people. Hence the scientific revolution. Okay? Again, it didn't happen in Russia. Russia was a backward country until the end of the 19th century. Okay? So those countries, non-European countries, which were able, or smart enough to capitalize on the scientific revolution, like Japan, they were very early modernizers. You know, Japan was able to modernize herself very early. She was able to beat Russia. We will be talking about tiny Japan that picked up scientific revolution from Europe, was able to beat Russia, the backward country that was modernized itself, you know, backward peasants, serfs, you know. Unfortunately, that's the story, you know. Anyway, it's a little bit different story we will be talking about. What we need right now to remember this thing, what we just mentioned, that in Northern Europe there was a pool of, a big pool of educated people, okay? And scientific revolution is something that emerged in Northern Europe, okay? Gradually, not overnight. Not overnight. We also need to mention what? Religious skepticism. Unfortunately, Martin Luther, without knowing this, by encouraging people to read the Bible, he provoked individual interpretation of the Bible. Okay? Remember I showed you something. Yeah, I showed you this Geneva Bible with footnotes. It provoked critical thinking. Okay? So people started to read, asking questions about miracles, biblical miracles. No, maybe they didn't happen. Maybe they did happen. So this kind of stuff. Okay? So it layered on religious skepticism, which had existed even before the modern world, before the 1500s. The Great Schism, I mentioned this a few times, which had existed for a long time in the Catholic Church, the conflict between the Roman popes, who tried to be supreme spiritual power, and local lords, Germanic lords, and what became known as France, England, and Germany, Austria. Local lords, they tried to challenge the power of Roman popes. They said, we're going to appoint bishops, abbots, priests. Okay. And the Pope said, no, no, it's us. So it was a tug of war. As a result of this, the separation of church and state emerged, you know, which we don't have in Eastern Christianity, in Islam and Buddhism. Okay. And that's where this 1517 comes. The more religious skepticism. Okay. Some people become more religious because they read the Bible and said, hey, the whole world is going to hell. Read the Bible. We are going to be saved. But others said, oh, hell with the church. I'm not good. I might not be going there. Or I might show up there once a month, you know, because the Roman popes might be frauds, you know, there's a bunch of Protestant groups, you know. We're going to do other things. And that's what some educated people of Europe started doing, okay. They turned to magic, occult, tarot cards, okay. You heard about it. So magic, in early modern age, it was the age of magic, occult in Western and Central Europe, in the wake of this skepticism that was created by the religious Reformation, okay? Geographical discoveries, we mentioned this. don't forget printing. Okay, these people who became skeptical, tiny percentage of people, I repeat, because majority of people remained religious, very religious. They were extremely religious. They believed that God constantly interfered in our life, everywhere, each day. But there was a tiny percentage of people, I repeat, who were frustrated about the church. They didn't quit. Many of them, they didn't quit the church. They kept going there, but they started looking for spiritual feedback on the side by practicing occult, magic, alchemy. Okay, and they printed their books. Okay, since they were educated people, they were printing books, and the invention of printing by Johann Gutenberg. Remember, I wrote it on a chalkboard. Johann Gutenberg, 1456, German town of Mainz. That's where printing was invented. Okay, not overnight, but gradually, out of the wine press, as I told you. Printing press was invented. So that is why I want to emphasize this phrase. So science, it wasn't something, or scientific revolution, science, it wasn't something that emerged out of the blue. It was something that emerged out of religious conflict, religious skepticism. Okay? So we need to talk about the religious origin of science. Why do I emphasize it? Because unfortunately this current book we are using in this course and other books and many specialized books, they don't mention this, or they mention it in passing. Okay? For example, not long ago I read a book about the origin of science by Richard Dawkins. You heard about Richard Dawkins? It's a kind of Mr. Scientist. Okay. Handicapped person, as far as I remember, who tells us about science, and we read and we listen to him, the expert. So again, I don't want to downgrade him, but when I read his popular book about the origin of science, I noticed a serious flaw. He doesn't write about how science emerged. He simply says, science emerged in the 1600s, was scientific revolution. And indeed, he is right. Scientific revolution was something that emerged in earnest in the 1600s. But he didn't write about this. Okay? So in this, when you read his book, you have this impression, okay, people were sleeping and they woke up and suddenly we have this small group of people who became known as scientists. Okay? So that is why I feel that I need to explain to you how things originated. Scientific revolution. All right, that's what I mentioned, and we need to write it down, I guess. So, frustration about existing church, desire to find truth somewhere else. Astrology, alchemy, Kabbalah, tarot cards, desire to perfect life of the people on this earth, existence of big pool of educated people, especially in Northern Europe. And again, one more time, when I said that frustration about existing church, I don't mean that they left the church forever. No. A lot of people who were frustrated about the church, they either wanted to reform it, or they started to show up there rarely. They simply, in addition to Christianity, they were looking for a spiritual feedback on the side. Okay. And let me jump ahead a little bit. We will be talking about Isaac Newton, for instance, one of the people who triggered scientific revolution. He was an extremely religious person. He practiced the Kabbalah, okay, astrology. He was interested in astrology. And he viewed his so-called scientific pursuits as a religious occupation. Okay? Not something like modern day scientists. Okay. So they had different mindset. And he also believed that God had created the world, Isaac Newton. By the way, these people who believed that God had created this world, who still shared ideals of Christianity, but who also were looking for answers on the side, in astrology, in Kabbalah, in alchemy. They became known as deists. What does it mean, deist?
It's like concerning the creation of everything, right? Like
Yeah.
Before the universe, not, you know, they don't think God has like an active influence in the world. I think He just created it and that was the end of the story.
That's it. That's the answer. That's the answer. Because one of this, by the way, this deism stuff is going to be on your test. It's a precise explanation. So deists believe that God had created the world, but He gave us the world to explore, and He, as you correctly said, doesn't interfere in this world. It's up to us to discover miracles. And these miracles became known as natural laws later, okay? So we are going to discover miracles because Mr. God, sorry my blasphemous remark, God planted a bunch of miracles. He is like a clockmaster. He had created the world. We don't deny His existence. But at the same time, we are not ignorant red-necked peasants who constantly see His interference in daily life. For instance, Isaac Newton, unlike some kind of peasant, couldn't say if he found, like, say, some money, 5 shillings on the ground, he wouldn't say, "Oh, God is watching for me." You know, he made sure that I found this 5 shillings. So these people didn't make these comments. You know, if his cow died, he wouldn't say, "Oh, God punished me for some evil deeds." It was peasant mentality who constantly believed that God interfered in daily life. These did not believe. They simply believed that God had created the world, and that was it. He kind of winded the world, and He stepped aside. I'm using this simple words to let you know how the mindset works. Okay. Anyway, I purposely, you could have seen this image everywhere. You know, it's an image that describes scientific revolution. See, going to church is not enough. People are trying to reach God on their own, to go through this world sphere, you know, to use telescope, to use everything. So church is not enough. We're going to see, maybe we're going to talk with Him somehow, okay? For example, there was a guy in Italy named, what's his first name? Marsilio Ficino. Marsilio Ficino. The end of the 1400s, the beginning of the 1500s. Astrologist. Sugar, I will explain it. He believed that if you eat a lot of sugar and you watch it through the telescope at the God's domain, this stars and everything, you will be able to see the God, maybe to talk with Him, because sugar might intensify your sensitivity. You know, that's bizarre. But that's what people did, you know. Some alchemists who tinkered with metals, with stones, with kind of different types of minerals, they believed that they could invent a philosophical stone that some kind of crystal ball that would give them knowledge of the whole world. It was bizarre expectation. How could you find the source of knowledge? You know, the source of knowledge, it never can be found. Okay, it's like inventing an eternal engine that doesn't exist. You know? The world has no beginning. The world has no end. You know? That's what more and more people right now realize. You know? But again, even today, some people want to have, okay, it started here, Big Bang. Scientist says, okay, oh, Mr. Oh God, you know, and the end is going to like apocalypse or something like we're going to dry out because of the global warming. I don't want to offend who believes in this prophecy of global warming, so sorry guys, you know. But again, I have to be skeptical because I don't take for granted all kinds of secular prophecies or religious prophecies. Okay. Anyway, astrology. So a person, you can see here this engraving, old engraving that shows this early modern age scientist who tries to reach out to the stars, to the God's domain. Same with alchemy. A lot of people in Northern Europe especially, they were, as I said, were tinkering with metals, experimented with minerals, with liquids, trying to invent this crystal ball, philosophical stone. Some of them had more mundane tasks. They wanted to invent gold, alchemists. But look what I put here. I tried to show to you how science emerged. Okay, out of astrology, gradually astronomy emerged. Okay, out of alchemy, chemistry gradually emerged. Not overnight, but gradually. Okay. Something else we need to write down. I didn't put it in my slides. Okay. Out of Kabbalah. Kabbalah, it's a magical number. It's kind of supposed ancient Jewish wisdom. Out of Kabbalah, mathematics. Okay. Tarot cards also were popular, but I don't know what emerged out of tarot cards. Sometimes it's just at dead end, I'm just showing to you how, by chance, scientific disciplines emerged out of occult pursuits. Before the scientific revolution also, step by step, originated step by step out of certain inventions. People believe that sparks of the scientific revolution emerged before the 1600s. Again, the 1600s, it's a century when scientific revolution flourished. But the sparks of the scientific revolution had been planted before. And particularly people, historians, believe that the seeds of the scientific revolution had emerged in the 1500s. Particularly out of teachings of Nicholas Copernicus. It's a Latin name of his name. Polish astronomer, Nicholas Copernicus. Polish astronomer, die-hard Catholic, by the way. Who wrote this book, Revolution of the Heavenly Bodies? Revolution is movement, of course. In old times, the word revolution was used in many different contexts. So the movement of the heavenly bodies. So he was asked by the Roman Pope to fix the Christian calendar, okay? Because at that time there was this concept dominant in the minds of the people, which is called heliocentric concept. Geocentric. People believe that geo means earth. So people believe that earth was in the center of the universe and all planets were revolving around the earth. Okay? And so when you tie your calendar to this mistaken concept, so your calendar will be screwed. Dates constantly shift, and the Roman Pope asked Nicholas Copernicus to fix the calendar. So he was an astrologist and a mathematician at the same time. And he said, if we use different configuration, if we imagine that sun is in the center of the universe and all planets move around the sun, in this case, our calendar will be fixed. Okay? In fact, when he wrote his letter to the Roman Pope, he said, I made this discovery and it was accepted, he was congratulated. But then he wrote a follow-up letter. He said, please, don't advertise it, don't tell about this to anybody. Nicholas Copernicus asked the Roman Pope. Why? Because it might uproot our Catholic doctrine. Okay? So the guy himself was afraid. So to the very end of his life, he forbade to publish his discovery. Only on his deathbed, some of his students, when he was already sick, they were able to print his book, and he was dying, and they brought him the copy of his book because he was so reluctant to go against the established concept. Okay? He was trapped into this Roman Catholic doctrine of geocentric. So basically, Nicholas Copernicus, by chance, discovered what became known as heliocentric doctrine. Helios means sun in Latin language. Okay? So Earth revolved around the sun. Again, it took dozens of other people to gradually pick up his book, to popularize, to publish brochures based on his book. Okay? For example, one of the German astrologist who became astronomer, Johannes Kepler. Johannes Kepler. He kind of invented the transitional theory. He didn't embrace right away his theory. He said, other planets, they revolved around the sun, but sun, along with other planets, revolved around the Earth. So he tried to find the middle ground. Can you imagine? Ideologically and scientifically, he tried to sit on both chairs. Okay, Johannes Kepler. Johannes Kepler. Sitting on two chairs. So he admitted, yes, the sun, the Earth is the center. Okay, in this case, Catholics couldn't blame him. At the same time, he said other planets except Earth revolved around the sun, and together, sun and these planets, they move around the Earth. Okay. One of the best popularizers of what Copernicus had done a long time ago was Galileo. Galilei, the name which everybody knows. Right? Galileo was a scientist, but he didn't discover anything new. He did not discover anything new. He was simply a good popularizer. He wrote popular books. He was teaching people. He had a bunch of students. So he promoted this heliocentric doctrine that sun was the center of the universe and all other planets, including the Earth, moved around the sun. On top of this, he created a powerful telescope. Again, he did not invent a telescope. He simply put a bunch of lenses, invented a powerful telescope, and was able to gaze at the moon, Mars, and he started to argue, it's just the moon, a bunch of stones, rocks, like what we have here on the Earth. And that's what provoked some Catholic priests, bishops to blame him, because at that time it was forbidden to say these things. Basically the message was, don't go there, whatever beyond the Earth, it's a God's domain. You cannot say it's just rocks, it's some kind of God's domain, spiritual domain. So don't go there. So he dared to go there, and he wrote about it in a popular language. Okay? So that is why he was brought to trial. There was a trial of Nicholas Copernicus. Everybody knows the story again. If you forgot or don't know, Google it, Wikipedia. So he was brought to the court of Inquisition. Remember Inquisition? During the Reformation, Catholics, to respond to Protestants, created this papal court called Inquisition to bring heretics and try them. Okay, screen them and try them. So Galileo Galilei was one of these folks who were brought to trial. He was given a choice to be condemned and maybe executed, or to denounce himself and save his life. Of course, he chose second. He admitted, say, yes, I admit it. The Earth is in the center of the world. But when he was living in court, he, according, I don't know if it happened or not, according to what the story or legend, supposedly he said, still, she moves around the sun. So he let his student know that he had to bow down to papal inquisition, but at the same time among his friends he said, oh, I didn't mean to say this. Okay. So he was put under house arrest and forbidden to teach. Okay. Just to compare, oh, by the way, the fate of Galileo Galilei is interesting to compare with what? With the fate of Isaac Newton. Okay? So how an intellectual, a scientist, was treated. Again, I have nothing against Roman Catholic religion. It did change, the present day to different religion. It's not like at that time. But at that time, we see how Catholic religion had treated a scientist. Okay, they put him on the house arrest. In Northern Europe, it was just the opposite. I'm not saying that at that time Protestants were more tolerant. For example, in England, remember the Bill of Rights, 1688. It was a good document, basically, the first constitution. But still, this Bill of Rights said that Catholics are evil and they're forbidden to worship in England because there was so much bad blood between Protestants and Catholics. So it's not freedom of religion, right? So all other denominations, including Judaism and Islam, were allowed, but Catholics were forbidden. Okay, so there was some bigotry, but still, compared to what was going on in Southern Europe, Roman Catholic countries, Northern Europe was more open. Okay, there were more opportunities, and that's what the fate of the good fate, so to speak, the luck, the success of Isaac Newton shows us the fate of the life of a scientist in Northern Europe who was backed up, supported by governments. Okay. Isaac Newton promoted the same theory about the Earth moving around the sun, and nobody executed him, nobody put him to trial. Just the opposite. He was appointed the president of Royal Academy of Sciences in England. Very powerful position. So he brought a bunch of people who were scientists, supported them. At some point, he even became jealous because there were so many talents in England. Okay. For example, Newton wrote about gravity. That was his major contribution, the gravity. By the way, at that time, those who promoted this heliocentric theory that planets, including the Earth, moved around the sun, they couldn't understand what kind of brings them to the sun, what makes them to move. Why don't they stray away in the universe? Okay, and the discovery of gravity proved it. So there was some kind of gravity that brings them together. Okay, but Newton was not the only one who wrote about gravity. There were many other scientists who were writing about gravity, and some of these scientists actually moved faster than Newton. Okay, and he was a little bit jealous. For example, there was a scientist named Thomas Hooks, I think, Thomas Hooks, like a small, short man who talked about gravity, who discovered gravity before Newton, and he came to challenge Newton to this Royal Academy of Sciences. And when Newton was making a presentation, and Newton felt uncomfortable about it, okay, because they basically working simultaneously on the same problem. And some scientists move forward, others lag behind. So when Hooks openly said, "Newton, you're stealing my discovery from me," he said, "Well, I'm using some of your discoveries, but I'm trying to move further." And then he made this offensive joke. He said, "And by the way," since he was a short man, "I'm standing on the shoulders of giants." And so everybody started to laugh. It was a very uncomfortable situation because Newton showed himself as a kind of bigoted man in this case. And he was the greatest scientist, but he tried to downgrade Hooks. Okay. But again, it's just a funny story. At the same time, of course, not funny for this Hooks, who was humiliated. And unfortunately for Hooks, it was Newton who became famous. Why? Because Newton was the president of Royal Academy of Sciences. He had access to printing presses, and so his book was published, widely published, unlike Hooks. Okay? But what does it tell? This story, like silly story, what does it tell us? There was a bunch of scientists in England. They even kind of tried to compete with each other, which was not the case in Southern Europe. Okay, and it's a good thing that there were a lot of inventors. Okay, and that's what eventually was bringing great the scientific revolution. Okay, in this famous book, Newton wrote Principia Mathematica, Principles of Mathematics. Newton and all these people, Hooks and other scientists, they believe that our universe is like machine, okay, perfect machine that had been created by God, and we have to explore this universe. And if we explore carefully the universe, we will find miracles that had been planted by God. And these miracles, Newton and other scientists at that time, they called them natural laws, because God had created natural laws, but they're hidden. So we have to unlock them. Okay? Gravity is one of these miracles. See, that is why I'm trying to explain to you that they were not thinking about laws of physics and all these things in present day way. They thought about these things from a religious viewpoint. Okay? In 1930s, when archives of Newton were open for public, everybody in our modern days, 1930s, public became surprised because they found out that he was a very spiritual person. Okay, he, on top of believing in God, he also believed in spirits. He practiced this magical sorcerers, with his friends, trying to call the spirits of dead people, and he even kept diaries of this, See, Isaac Newton, scientist, just to tell you that he was extremely religious person. Francis Bacon, another name we need to remember, who contributed to the scientific revolution. Francis Bacon was, like Galileo Galilei, a famous popularizer. Not he didn't discover anything new, he simply was a popularizer. He introduced this expression, experimental method, that became the foundation of science. So you practice inductive reasoning, so approach a phenomenon without any bias, with an open mind. Don't have any preconceived biases about what you observe. And make experiments, and if the experiment repeats itself, so that's natural law, That's how things were discovered in physics and chemistry, eventually. If you have a repeating pattern. And finally, the last bullet point, he argued that science should improve the life of people. And he even liked to repeat this phrase, conquer nature. At that time, it was very progressive to say it. See, right now, it's just the opposite. We conquered nature so much, now we're more concerned about how to save the nature. Right? But at that time, people had been dependent on nature so much, they needed to conquer nature. And Francis Bacon said, we need to use these miracles, natural laws, that had been given to us by God to perfect the life of the people, because he wanted to perfect the life of the people. Okay? And we have to discover these natural laws. God meant for us to conquer the nature, but we, using the power, our reason, human reason, we have to discover natural laws. He was, by the way, the one who said this famous phrase, knowledge is power, remember? You heard it, knowledge is power, so you can write it somewhere on the side. Knowledge is power, that phrase said by Francis Bacon. René Descartes, a Frenchman, also contributed something to the scientific revolution. Unlike Bacon, who said experiment is everything, we have to go from down below to set a bunch of experiments in order to discover natural law. René Descartes talked about logical reasoning. He said, let's go. Yes, we can go from down below experiments, but we can go from up above. We can build a logical reasoning. So A gives rise to B gives rise to C. Let's build this logical sequence, Things should be logical. Things should make sense. Okay. And then you can try if it fits the reality. Okay. If it doesn't, so it means our logical chain we built has nothing to do with reality. So he offered this way of doing science. And that became a powerful reason in math. Math is based on logical reasoning. In fact, we have a special discipline that was born at that time called logic. Logic. I don't know if it's taught right now or not, right? Maybe not. Logic. Okay, second half of our conversation today. Let me see the time. Yeah, we have plenty of time. Or not? Yeah, we have time. Look, these people who worked in the wake of the Reformation, 1600s, who became known as scientists. By the way, they called themselves in the 1600s. People like Isaac Newton, Galileo Galilei, they called themselves natural philosophers. Natural philosophers. Okay. they talked about nature. Let's explore the nature. Nature, as I said, has natural laws. We're going to discover them. But some of them started to ask the question. If nature has natural laws, it means society, human society, as part of nature, doesn't it have natural laws as well? So it means our society, as part of nature, also should have natural laws. Okay? And we need to discover them, like the best political system, the best economic system, the best political laws, economic laws. Maybe we have to discover them. Okay? So there were some scientists who started looking into the ways of society, how we should organize society, okay, in order to build the perfect one. Okay? And these people who were concerned about natural laws, discovered natural laws in society, became known as people of enlightenment. Enlightenment, it means to enlighten people, okay? Because their major goal was to enlighten uneducated masses, unwashed masses, in natural laws. Okay? They try to bring education, to teach people about gravity, to teach people about different concepts. Okay? Eventually, at the end of this conversation, you will see during the Enlightenment, they published encyclopedia, the first encyclopedia, to bring knowledge to people, okay, to empower people. Because they knew that lack of knowledge would not allow people to create a good life. You know? And the more educated people we have, the quicker we discover natural laws. They talked about progress, reason, education, enlightenment. We need to enlighten people. So enlightenment was born out of the scientific revolution. Again, not overnight, but gradually. And some of the names we just mentioned, they also belong to Enlightenment age. Okay? Enlightenment became widespread when? Next century, the 1700s. So scientific revolution, it was something that was going on in the 1600s. Enlightenment, it was something that was going on in the 1700s. It was born out of the scientific revolution. Because of this, the second bullet point is very important here. Okay? Because the assumption was that if nature can be explored, it means our society could be examined just like natural environment. Okay? Oh, the first bullet point is more clear. To emphasize that they were concerned about society, they started to call themselves philosophes. Philosophes, it's a French word. Philosophes, it means thinkers. We think about society. Not only nature, but society concerns us. These people met and they formed clubs. Mostly these clubs, societies, they met in coffee houses. Coffee drinking, coffee houses became widespread in Europe at the end of the 1600s. By the way, this traditional coffee drinking came from Asia Minor, from Turkey. Okay? Ironically, in the 1600s in Turkey, coffee drinking was not encouraged. Okay? Because sultans and Muslim clerics were afraid that people might be going to coffee houses instead of mosques. So that is why there was a crackdown on coffee houses in Turkey, which had introduced them. Unlike Europe, we're just the opposite. Coffee drinking spread around, coffee houses emerged. There were, by the end of the 1700s, there were thousands of them in major cities. And of course, the Starbucks and others, they originated from this tradition. Okay? So to the present day, we meet in coffee houses, we talk about our problems, curse the government, curse our colleagues, friends, sometimes befriend each other, meet people, That's tradition that was born at the end of the 1600s. Okay. In Europe, and I repeat, in Turkey it had existed before, but in Turkey it was scorched. Okay? Unlike Europe. Another interesting thing, and you will see how things are connected. because next time we will be talking about American Revolution, then we will be talking about French Revolution. So the Enlightenment stuff was going on simultaneously with what became known as American and French Revolution. In many respects, the American Revolution and French Revolution were the products of Enlightenment. Products of Enlightenment. Okay? And for example, Jefferson literally was the guy who was feeding on these ideas, which we just mentioned. He was reading Newton, others, and we will mention a few other names. Okay? Jefferson was reading French books, English books. England for him was, early England, for him was a role model, and he believed that England betrayed her own ideals by denying freedom for Americans, because Americans tried to extend the English freedoms, ideals of the English Revolution of 1688. Okay, so Jefferson was the best example of the American Enlightenment. And by the way, one of the questions on your test, remember there was a question: who is the best representative of Enlightenment in the United States? Something like this. And the first name that comes up is Thomas Jefferson. Benjamin Franklin, but Benjamin Franklin was more about scientific revolution, because he was doing things about natural sciences. But Thomas Jefferson was discovering or concerned about natural laws in society. So he was looking for the best model for US to build on, to organize society. So keywords, again, I mentioned this: reason, science, progress. Okay, people should be more educated. Liberty, personal freedom is everything. Okay. Another thing, Enlightenment ideas, of course, were more popular among city folks, because cities in Western Europe and what later became known as the United States, Eastern colonies, and North America, they were the most educated centers. They harbored most educated people. Okay, that is why cities were the center of Enlightenment. So middle-class people were the class of people who embraced these ideas of Enlightenment. Merchants, bankers, clerks, scribes, people who had to deal with printed stuff, printed college books, newspapers. And eventually, these philosophers and people of Enlightenment, they realized that in order for a good society to function, power should be balanced, checks and balances. They looked up to England, of course. Constitution should limit royal power, freedom of speech, freedom of press, equality before the law. So no aristocratic privileges. That was the message. Because a lot of middle-class people, some of them were rich. People like Washington, Jefferson, or in England, I don't know what the name is. John Wesley, famous Methodist, founder of Methodist Church in England. They were middle-class people, but they were not aristocrats. They were humble origin, and they wanted to have access to power, okay, which was denied for them by the feudal regime. So they wanted to destroy the old regime and introduce this legal freedom. So we should free in the eyes of the law. Again, some of the scientists were active in Enlightenment, like Isaac Newton. Okay, like Isaac Newton argued, since our universe is machine, our society as part of the universe also should be like a well-functioning machine. So let's make sure that it's not rusted, it's oiled, and we need to know how it should be functioning. Okay, and we need to find out what's the best engine of this machine. Okay? Thomas Hobbes, one of the Enlightenment people, see, he still lived in early in the 1600s. He was concerned about the good government, how we should build a good government. And he analyzed this religious fights in Europe, between Catholics and Protestants, and he said, people are ready to kill each other over religion. People are ready to kill each other over taxes. More taxes, less taxes. people are ready to kill each other about other things. So the government, we need to have government. Government is going to be like a middleman, like an umpire. Okay? Without government, people will devour each other, like wolves. So, and that's the natural law. So that's the natural law, okay? So let's give up some powers and give these powers to the government. Not everything, but some of the major powers. Okay? So he wrote a book called Leviathan. Leviathan means big government. So he said government is unavoidable evil. It's evil, but we have to have this evil, otherwise we will destroy each other. That was his assumption. Many people disagreed with him. They said we don't need the government. Okay? There was a debate, but he argued it was a natural law. This government as the middleman. Okay? There was another guy, Englishman, John Locke. This guy was especially read by Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson was fascinated with this guy to the point that he copied literally from John Locke. Like this famous phrase that opens Declaration of Independence, all men were created equal. It was copied from John Locke, okay? Literally copied. So he wrote this book, John Locke, Second Treatise of the Government. What he did, he analyzed the English Revolution. Remember, the English people beheaded their king. Okay? And he said, it's very important what had happened in England. Why? Because it shows us the power is not divine. The head of the government, a queen or a king, they just managers. And let's treat them as managers. Power comes not from up above, from the divine figure of the king or queen. Power comes from below, said John Locke. Comes from the people. People are the source of the power. And if people, at some point in history, are dissatisfied with the government, they have a right to kick out this government. That was his message, very subversive message. Okay? And that's what later was included in the Declaration of Independence that said, if it sounds certain in human history, government doesn't fulfill something, I don't exactly quote, but something like this. People have a right to revolt against this government. Okay? All men are created equal. That's what Thomas Jefferson wrote, but it had been said by John Locke. Well, okay, people today might have a problem with this, all men are created equal. But you have to understand, at that time, all societies all over the world were male-oriented, right? Women were totally excluded, okay? It was, unfortunately, it was the fact, okay? And unfortunately, many women accepted it, okay? Not everybody. We'll be talking about French Revolution. We will see how some women try to say all men and women are created equal, but they didn't receive support at that time because the mainstream opinion was that women, like John said, it should be Kinder, Kirche, church, kitchen, children. Okay, that was the male-oriented society. Okay, unfortunately, it was only later that women received the rights later, as I told you during my first lecture. It was only happened. It happened in earnest when in the 20th century, recently. Okay, so that hence this phrase. Okay, but at that time, even men didn't have any power. Okay, so there was a problem how to empower at least this small group of people. Okay, and he also said, John Locke, that good government should protect private property. That was the major job of the government. And unlike Thomas Hobbes, John Locke said, watch out, the big government is dangerous. Okay, the major job of the government to protect private property, and that's it. In other respects, it should stay away. Another powerful person, another name we need to know, is Adam Smith, a very important name. Did anybody hear about, what did he do, Adam Smith? Anybody? Anybody? Adam Smith. His book, last year, I strolled in the Barnes & Noble bookstore in Germantown and saw actually his book called The Wealth of Nations. He wrote a book called Wealth of Nations, published in 1776. What happened in 1776? Interesting. It's still in the paperback. Okay, interesting. Let's see what he said. He also claimed that he had discovered natural law. Okay? He argued that he had discovered the law of supply and demand. Supply and demand. It's a natural law. If a country doesn't follow this law, economically it's going to be screwed. We need to practice this. Unfortunately, a big government tried to squash us, tried to tell people how much they should produce, prices, what kind of prices they should set up. The government tries to regulate the life of the people. And at that time, indeed, all royal powers all over the world, except the northern, eastern part of North America, regulated economic life of the people. And he was fighting against it. So he introduced this famous principle of laissez-faire. It's a French word, which means hands off. Big government, hands off. That was his message, laissez-faire. Okay. The government is not interested in economic enterprise. Government is interested in supporting bureaucracy, regulation. People of the government are not concerned about economic efficiency. They are more concerned about their bureaucratic positions. And he was right in this case, of course. That is why we should have as less as possible these people. Okay? The less bureaucrats we have, the better. So economically, country will prosper if we have laissez-faire. And that is why he said people have to be free to do it, to be hired and to be fired. People have to be free to set up their own businesses, and people have to be free to go broke. Don't restrain the freedom. That's a natural thing. Okay? That is why he was against slavery. He was one of the major spearheads that contributed to what? To the destruction of slavery. And the first country, as you know, in one of my first lectures, I told you England was the first country in the world who, in earnest, I repeat, in earnest, not on paper, in earnest, eliminated slave trade and then eliminated slavery. And Adam Smith was one of these people who was fighting against slavery. Okay, unfortunately, we don't mention it, but we have to mention it. In addition to some Methodist priests, William Wilberforce, I think, was one second major spearhead of anti-slavery movement. Adam Smith was one of the people who introduced this law in English Parliament and promoted. Why? Because he said slavery, it's a backward thing. It's outdated thing. It retards economical any country. Why? Because nobody's going to work for free. Nobody's going to work for free. And he was right, of course, in this case. That is why he was fighting against this. He actually used American South as an example in his book, Wealth of Nations. He said, look, the northern part of North America is very prosperous because there is hardly any slavery there. But southern part, unfortunately, they shoot themselves in the foot. Yes, they get a lot of profits from tobacco industry. At that time, it was still tobacco. Later, of course, was cotton was introduced, and more to the end of the 1700s. But originally, it was tobacco and rice. Yes, these guys, slaveholders, reap a lot of profits, but eventually they destroy the economy because there would be no factories, no free labor, no farming, nothing, you know. So it's economically it would go down. And he was right in this case. He was right in this case. So we need to mention this. But at the same time, he was a die-hard enemy of welfare state. He said welfare corrupts people because the more welfare you give people, people like freedom. Okay? And if we give people welfare, we create the whole class of people who would be milking economy, who would be like drones, would destroy your economy. So he said this. Okay? So, interesting person. But again, he claimed that he had discovered this natural law of supply and demand. He said if something is needed economically, some kind of spoons, whatever, engines, some kind of textiles, shirts, pants, shoes, business people set up businesses, factories, they produce them. If something is not needed, they go bankrupt or they shift their businesses somewhere else. And the government should stay away from it, because if government begins to meddle, you invite the trouble. Okay? So basically he was one of the first spearheads of free market, that's very popular. Today, ideologically, like libertarians and some conservatives, not everybody, some conservatives in the United States, they support this. Democrats, as you know, they're against this. Okay, I'm not making judgment, I'm just saying how it is. Okay, Montesquieu is another interesting man. Ironically, he was an aristocrat who went against his own class. He promoted the English model. He said, look at the England. English people, by chance, they had discovered natural law. 1688, Glorious Revolution, Bill of Rights. By chance, we need to copy them. So he wrote books the way promoted England as the answer to all the questions. Checks and balances. Look how in England, royal power is balanced by the parliament. At the same time, the power of the parliament and the king is balanced by the independent court. Go there. Let's imitate them. Baron de Montesquieu. French baron. All right. Oh, another person. Another Frenchman, philosopher. Person of enlightenment. Francois Marie Arouet Voltaire. One name, just Voltaire. Okay. A writer who criticized church, Catholic Church. Very much. That's what he was famous for. But at the same time, he said, the natural law, checks and balances, is not enough. In addition, for checks and balances to function really well, you need another natural law. It's freedom of speech and press. Unlimited. Unlimited freedom of speech. And he was fighting for this. He is famous for saying this phrase. I decided to cut it. I hate your views, but I will die for your right to express them, unquote. Ask yourself, how many of you are ready to say this? I'm not asking you to raise the hand, but just think about it. Not me. What he said is